Hello, everyone. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Thanks for being here. We're now going to continue with the object of devotion for observing the mind. And one note on the question and answer format. Some of you have wondered that was an invention of Nichiren's or something pre-existing. Actually, the Q&A format is what almost everything in Buddhist documentation or scholarship is in, unless you're reading a treatise about the writings. The writings themselves, down to Shakyamuni, it's not labeled Q&A, but it is in fact Q&A. In fact, one of the traditions in the sutra is that when the assembled gathering, whether it be one person representing all of them or all of them in unison, tend to ask a question of Shakyamuni 3 times. This was just a formality that if you ask the question once, you're curious. If you ask a question a second time, you're deeply curious, or really, and the third time you're truly wanting to resolve the matter and completely open to hearing the proposed answer, something of that nature. So even in some of these, you'll notice they have to go all the way to a 4th, which usually indicates a very important point is about to be illustrated, if you have to go that far. But 3 is usually sufficient. And if you're a studier of or student of ancient Asian discourse and documentation, you'll see that this pre-exists. Shakyamuni was using a form that was common to the common people, not just the elite. I mean, that was one of Shakyamuni's or Siddhartha's biggest points, is that this teaching should be universal, free of caste or position or anything, any kind of privilege. If it's true, it's true. It's just true for everyone. Just like gravity doesn't affect a billionaire any differently than it affects a homeless person. Gravity's gravity. And so if there's a fundamental method for awakening, it should be the same way. It should be another force, just as gravity or the weak nuclear or whatever force you want to. And this, I talk about energy a lot because it's an analogy that I don't think is very far off from exactly what Buddhism has been saying all along. They just use different verbiage to discuss it. So now the Q&A proceeds a little deeper, and Nichiren is dealing with doubt in his students, both in his immediate surrounding and in his Q&A here with history. And he's asked to illustrate, why is it different now than it was 2,700 years ago or 1,000 years ago? Why are people now, where in the documentation, the sutras, is it discussed that this enlightenment, this tool for enlightenment, this Gohonzon, this Daimoku that you're proposing, and the Lotus Sutra in general, why does it stand not only in its lofty place, which we've already discussed as the ultimate teaching, but why wasn't it practiced this way early on? Why the difference? Why the steps? Why the 5 periods? Why why not just teach the answer? So this questioning persists, and it's been explained many, many times. But so Nichiren is going to open this up again and demonstrate in the Lotus and others sutras where this is made obvious, but certainly his focus is going to be in the Lotus. How does the Lotus claim to be this? for we of the latter day. How was it not something they could use earlier? Remember, we talked about Nagarjuna knew this in his heart, but he didn't explicitly say it. Well, why? Why now? So, here we go. On what authority do you say that the essential teaching is meant for the generations of the latter day of the law? Answer. The Emerging from the Earth chapter states, quote, at that time, the Bodhisattvas Mahasattva, who had gathered from the lands of the other directions, greater in number than the sands of the 8 Ganges rivers, stood up in the midst of the great assembly, pressed their palms together, bowed in obeisance, and said to the Buddha, World-honored one, if you will permit us in the age after the Buddha has entered extinction to diligently and earnestly protect, embrace, read, recite, copy, and offer alms to this sutra in the Saha world, we will preach it widely through this land. At that time, the Buddha said to the Bodhisattvas Mahasattva, leave off, good men. There is no need for you to protect and embrace this sutra. Interesting. This statement totally contradicts the Buddha's exhortations in the preceding 5 chapters of the Teacher of the Law to the Peaceful Practices. In the latter part of the Treasure Tower chapter is the passage, quote, in a loud voice, he, Shakyamuni Buddha, addressed all the 4 kinds of believers, saying, who is capable of broadly preaching the Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law in this Saha world? Medicine King and the other great bodhisattvas, Brahma, Shakra, the gods of the sun and moon, and the 4 heavenly kings, would have followed Shakyamuni's command before anything else, even if no other Buddha had supported his exhortations. But many treasures Buddha and the Buddhas from throughout the 10 directions came to this world to exhort them to propagate the sutra after Shakyamuni's passing. Thus, hearing the Buddha's solemn appeal, the bodhisattvas all pledged, saying, quote, we care nothing for our bodies or lives, for they desired, end quote, for they desired solely to fulfill the Buddha's will. I'm going to jump back real quick here. A lot of people don't just skip over this when they read it in the sutras, especially in the Lotus. But it's really explicitly, Nichiren explicitly says it here. Diligently and earnestly protect, embrace, read, study, recite, chant, copy. That word, nobody discusses it. Why copy? Why is that essential to practice? Well, there are different ways to copy. Number one, we copy by doing what I'm doing right now. I'm copying what I'm reading verbally to you. That's a copy, right? That's not a recitation, which is different. A recitation is for oneself. And any of the Sangha that are with you in combination recite together. That's an activity that is shared in a different way than a discussion, which is shared ideologically to get at personal truths through the same language and the same teaching, right? It's different. But taken further, and I still get questions about these. I have a Japanese person right now who's evidently from the questions quite indoctrinated in the culture, as we all are, and probably has practiced with sectarian Buddhists over several years. And she is asking me where this Gohonzon comes from that I use. What sect did it come from? Well, it doesn't come from a sect. It comes from Nichiren, the originator of Gohonzon. That's how I study everything. I don't mess around with the various representations of something. I want to go to the source. So, well, how can this Gohonzon be genuine if you didn't get handed it by a proper authority? See, there's that authoritarian thing. That's government. That's politics. That has nothing to do with Buddhism. This whole claim of authoritarian ownership, to bequeath to you something that is universal and already extant in you, it's completely contradictory to the teachings themselves. So yes, when I went looking for the Gohonzon that was free of politics and authoritarian sectarianism and all of that, I didn't look for anything created by anyone other than Nichiren. And if you do your research, you can find it online, and I've mentioned this before, and it's on my website and in several posts. There are entire groups of scholars whose main purpose is to study the mandala of Nichiren. And they have located, photographed, and digitized 125 extant Gohonzons. That's it. That's all they've found in the whole world, is 125 of them. From the very earliest, as I've said before, Nichiren created Gohonzons specific to certain people, and they became more and more elaborate as his practice and teaching went on, to eventually, as we're discussing in this Gosho, the encapsulation of the entire profundity of the Lotus Sutra, which includes every teaching that it stands on. It is the ultimate teaching. That's why in the middle of the Gohonzon, the title of this teaching, Myoho Renge Kyo, and all of the various emanations and personages of Buddha, and the major figureheads of different periods of the teaching, who all end up achieving their Buddhahood in the Lotus Sutra, are represented on it. And they have graciously digitized these Gohonzons and made them available for study. I picked the most evolved one I could find, the latest in his career, the one he's reputed to be buried with, and I got myself a digital copy of that. I put it online through Cafe Press at cafepress.com/Gohonzon, so that anyone could download on quality paper a copy of that Gohonzon. I'm doing, and you are doing, exactly what is written in the Lotus Sutra itself. Copy. So there can be no more authoritarian source than Nichiren and Shakyamuni themselves. So yes, this is the Gohonzon I use. It's free from politic. It's free from people claiming that they're the ones who you have to then be bequeathed this teaching. This teaching is universal. That's the point. So there it is. A Nichiren inscribed Gohonzon copy without all of the other mess. It's clear. This is why I use this Gohonzon. And this is the Gohonzon he's talking about in this Gosho, and others, but we're working on this one right now. So, get that off my chest. In the Emerging from the Earth chapter, however, the Buddha suddenly reversed himself and forbade all the bodhisattvas more numerous than the sands of the Ganges rivers from propagating the sutra in this world. We therefore face what appears to be an insoluble contradiction, one that is beyond ordinary understanding. The great teacher Tendai Che gave 3 reasons for Shakyamuni's stopping the bodhisattvas, and 3 more for his summoning the bodhisattvas of the earth, you and I. Essentially, the great bodhisattvas taught by the Buddha in his transient status as great bodhisattvas who gathered from the other worlds were not qualified to inherit the lifespan chapter that reveals the eternal Buddha's inner truth. At the dawn of the latter day, evil people who slander the correct teaching would fill the land. So Shakyamuni Buddha rejected the pledge of these bodhisattvas and instead summoned the multitude of great bodhisattvas from beneath the earth. He entrusted them with the 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo, the heart of the lifespan chapter, for the enlightenment of all beings in the land of Jambudvipa, which is all of humanity. The bodhisattvas taught by the Buddha in his transient status were also unqualified because they had not been the disciples of Shakyamuni Buddha since the time he had first set his mind on and attained enlightenment in the remote past. See, Shakyamuni had followers before he was Shakyamuni. The great teacher Tendai states, quote, "The Buddha said of bodhisattvas of the earth, 'These are my disciples, destined to propagate my law.' Miao Lo says, 'The children propagate the law of the Father, and this benefits the world.' The supplement to the words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra states, 'The law embodied therein,' in the Lotus Sutra, 'is the law that was realized countless kalpas in the past, and therefore it was entrusted to persons who had been the Buddha's disciples from countless kalpas in the past.'" So this whole dancing back and forth through time is a feature that often arises in the sutras. And this isn't literal time travel from a modern sense. It's time travel in a commitment and mental developmental way. So there's a recognition here that people with capacity who study hard are not necessarily ready to propagate this ultimate law. Okay, so people who, in other words, were practicing the earlier teachings, those are preparatory teachings. They're not prepared to teach the ultimate teaching. They're not there yet. For instance, you wouldn't take, no matter how excellent a student of geometry and trigonometry is, you wouldn't then put upon them to teach calculus. It would be irresponsible. Even though they would probably give it a good old try, they just wouldn't be ready to do that. And what Nichiren is pointing out is when he summoned the bodhisattvas from beneath the earth, he's talking about future. He's talking in the future, these people will have the capacity and they will understand the meaning of this ultimate teaching, and therefore they will be the best suited to spread it, recite it, read it, copy it, and propagate it throughout the lands. That's us. That's our Sangha he's talking about. In the Emerging from the Earth chapter, Bodhisattva Maitreya questions Shakyamuni Buddha as follows, quote, "We ourselves have resolute mind and conviction in the Buddha, believing that he preaches in accordance with what is appropriate, that the words spoken by the Buddha are never false, and that the Buddha's knowledge is in all cases penetrating and comprehensive. Nevertheless, in the period after the Buddha has entered extinction, if bodhisattvas who have just begun to aspire to the enlightenment should hear these words, they will perhaps not believe or accept them, but will be led to commit the crime of rejecting the law. Therefore, world-honored one, we beg you to explain so that we may put aside our doubts, and so that in the future ages, when good men hear of this matter, they will not entertain doubts." Here, Bodhisattva Maitreya was imploring the Buddha to preach the lifespan chapter for those who would come after his passing. The lifespan chapter states, quote, "Some are completely out of their minds, while others are not. Those children who have not lost their senses can see that this is good medicine, outstanding in both color and fragrance, So they take it immediately and are completely cured of their sickness, end quote. Now that's a reference to the chapter in the Lotus Sutra about the doctor with 3 sons who is always abroad and moving around helping people, curing people, and the sons are left alone, and then the 3 sons catch some kind of virus or whatever. They get sick. And the father comes home, sees them sick, offers them all medication. 2 of them take the medication and they're better immediately, but there's a third who's stubborn. He has doubts. He's so deluded by his sickness that he thinks maybe his dad's trying to poison him. And so, failing anything else, the father leaves and tells the sons, I hope I see you all again, but I have to go. And he leaves. And then he sends a messenger back to tell the sons that he's passed away. He's died in some accident. And this puts them all 3 in a terrible place emotionally in their minds. They've lost their father. Oh, my goodness. And the one who was deluded, who didn't take the medication, is now mourning his father's death, and he thinks, what the heck? And he takes the medication, and he's cured. And then the father comes home and says, I'm not dead. I just needed to do that so that you, my 3rd son, you would take the medication. And then they're all overjoyed, blah, blah, blah. So this is to illustrate how the good medicine of the Lotus Sutra, if you're not ready to get it, could turn you against it. And this is the point that's being explored here, right? So you'll hear more about this, but now hopefully that brief little synopsis of the story will help you understand. The sutra explains that all bodhisattvas, persons of the 2 vehicles, and human and heavenly beings, received the seeds of Buddhahood numberless major world system dust particle kalpas ago. In other words, it's already extant, it's inherent. The seeds were nurtured by the preaching of the 16th son of the Buddha, great universal wisdom excellence, as well as by Shakyamuni Buddha's 4 flavors of teachings and the theoretical teachings of the Lotus Sutra. It's always been there. Then they finally gained the way when they heard the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra. He gave them the simple method to access it immediately. Stop dreaming about it. Here it is. Do it. The lifespan chapter continues, quote, those who are out of their minds are equally delighted to see their father return and beg him to cure their sickness. But when they're given the medicine, they refuse to take it. Why? Because the poison has penetrated deeply in their minds, no longer function as before. And their minds no longer function as before. So although the medicine is of excellent color and fragrance, they do not perceive it as good. The father thinks to himself, I must now resort to some expedient means to induce them to take the medicine. So he says to them, I'm going to leave the good medicine here. You should take it and not worry that it will not cure you. Having given these instructions, he then goes off to another land where he sends a messenger home to announce, according to the Distinctions in Benefits chapter, the good medicine of the lifespan chapter is left for those in the evil age of the latter day of the law. Question. Who is the messenger mentioned in the passage? He sends a messenger home to announce. Answer. It means the 4 ranks of sages. They fall into 4 categories. First, most of the 4 ranks of sages of Hinayana appeared in the first 500 years of the former day of the law. And second, most of those of provisional Mahayana came in the second 500 years. Third, those of the theoretical teachings appeared mainly in the next 1,000 years and the middle day of the law, and the rest in the beginning of the latter day. Fourth, the 4 ranks of sages of the essential teachings are the bodhisattvas emerging from the earth, numerous as the dust particles of 1,000 worlds, who are certain to appear in the beginning of the latter day. That's us. When the sutra says, quote, he sends a messenger home to announce, it refers to the bodhisattvas of the earth. This good medicine is the heart of the lifespan chapter, or Myoho Renge Kyo, which is endowed with name, entity, quality, function, and teaching. So those of you, here's another description of what does Myoho Renge Kyo mean. What does Namu Myoho Renge? Well, we know what Namu means, but Myoho Renge Kyo. Why am I chanting these magic words? And again, they're not magic words. They're representations. They're invocations of sectors and understandings of the concepts of enlightenment, of awakening. So they have a name, which is what everyone's stuck on, Myoho Renge Kyo. But they also are an entity. Entity. What's an entity, right? It's a container, a vessel, right? And a quality, because it's the ultimate teachings. This vessel is of the highest quality. A function, to open the door to your enlightenment, and a teaching, the Dharma, the teaching, the relatable experience of the what's the grammatical, the definite article. Sorry about my throat. Since the Buddha would not entrust this good medicine even to the bodhisattvas of the theoretical teaching, how much less could he have done so to the bodhisattvas of other worlds? The Supernatural Powers chapter states, at that time the bodhisattvas Mahasattva, who had emerged from the earth, numerous as the dust particles of 1,000 worlds, all in the presence of the Buddha, single-mindedly pressed their palms together, gazed up in reverence at the face of the Honored One, and said to the Buddha, World Honored One, after the Buddha has entered extinction in the lands where the emanations of the World Honored One are present, and in the place where the Buddha has passed into extinction, we will preach this sutra far and wide. Oh, there's so much I could talk about just that one partial paragraph. Again, I apologize for my throat. Where are we time-wise? Barely half an hour. Tendai says, the great assembly witnessed the bodhisattvas of the earth alone making this pledge. Dao Xin remarks, quote, as far as transmission goes, this sutra was entrusted solely to the bodhisattvas who had welled up out of the earth. The reason for this is that the law embodied therein is the law that was realized countless kalpas in the past, and therefore it was entrusted to persons who had been the Buddha's disciples from countless kalpas in the past. Now, there's an interesting way to read that. I know I've been hammering this, but that too, in a very real way, is Ichinen Sanzen, right there. Because what the bodhisattvas of the earth is arising from beneath the earth is our manifestation in this universe. It's our entire energetic combinatory formation instantiating as human beings, manifesting samsara, all from this quiescent energy billions of years ago. Buddhahood, Buddha-ness, is in that process as well. If it's inherent in our nature, then it was always inherent in the nature of all the process of life, as we've already said. So, in a way, in a different vernacular, this is saying exactly that. The reason for this is that the law embodied therein is the law that was realized countless kalpas ago. This is Ichinen Sanzen. Bodhisattva Manjushri is a disciple of the Buddha immovable, who dwells in the golden-colored world to the east. Bodhisattva perceiver of the world's sounds is a disciple of the Buddha infinite life in the west. Bodhisattva medicine king is a disciple of the Buddha sun, moon, pure, bright virtue. Bodhisattva universal worthy is a disciple of the Buddha jewel dignity. They came to this Saha world to help Shakyamuni Buddha teach the people of this day. They were bodhisattvas of the provisional and theoretical teachings and were not entrusted with the supreme law, so they could not possibly appear and propagate it in the latter day. Another way to read that is these other bodhisattvas were teaching tools to teach us, to teach humans along the way. So if the Lotus Sutra is the ultimate teaching, and these are constructs, bodhisattvas and Buddhas of earlier teachings, then their conceptual being and their capacity to bring you to enlightenment are obviously not the ultimate. The ultimate comes later. The Lotus Sutra, the ultimate Myoho Renge Kyo, isn't taught until the sutra, the 16th chapter of the sutra, Lotus Sutra. So obviously these earlier emanations, these thought experiments of these great teachers is incomplete. Does that make sense? It really, when you start to think that or read it that way, it's very transparent, all of this flowery language that can really serve as an obstacle to your understanding. If you understand it as this is storytelling, it all falls right into place. It's very meticulous. In the Supernatural Powers chapter, the sutra says, "At that time, the world-honored one, before all these, he displayed his great supernatural powers. He extended his long, broad tongue upward until it reached the Brahma heaven. The other Buddhas seated on the lion seats underneath the numerous jeweled trees did likewise, extending their long, broad tongues." Right? You probably remember reading that. In no other sutra, whether Hinayana or Mahayana, exoteric or esoteric, is there a passage that describes Shakyamuni Buddha and all the other Buddhas seated together, extending their tongues to the Brahma heaven. It's because all of these stories, all of these previous sutras, these personages from previous teachings, all coalesce into one voice. The Lotus. Page turning karma. I haven't said that in a while. The Amida Sutra states that Buddhas covered a major world system with their broad, long tongues, but lacks the truth that such a gesture would substantiate. The Wisdom Sutra tells how the Buddha's tongue covered a major world system and radiated infinite light when he expounded the prajna, or wisdom. Yet this certainly cannot be a proof comparable to that of the Supernatural Powers chapter, because these two sutras include provisional teachings. They obscure the Buddha's enlightenment in the remote past. In other words, it's not immediately available to you. After the Buddha displayed his 10 supernatural powers, he entrusted the 5 characters of the wonderful and difficult to understand law to the bodhisattvas of the earth. As the sutra states, quote, "At that time, the Buddha spoke to superior practices and the others in the great assembly of bodhisattvas, saying, 'The supernatural powers of the Buddhas, as you have seen, are immeasurable, boundless, inconceivable. If in the process of entrusting this sutra to others I were to employ these supernatural powers for immeasurable, boundless hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, millions of asamkhya kalpas to describe the benefits of the sutra, I could never finish doing so. To put it briefly, all the doctrines possessed by the Thus Come One are the freely exercised supernatural powers of the Thus Come One, the storehouse of all the secret essentials of the Thus Come One, all the most profound matters of the Thus Come One. All these are proclaimed, revealed, and clearly expounded in this sutra." Tendai says, quote, "The passage that follows the words, 'At that time the Buddha spoke to superior practices,' constitutes the third stage of the chapter, the transfer of the essence of the Lotus Sutra." Dengyo states, quote, "Supernatural Powers chapter says," the Subuddha, "to put it briefly, all the doctrines possessed by the thus come one, so on and so forth, are proclaimed, revealed, and clearly expounded in this sutra. From this, it is clear that all the doctrines, all the freely exercised supernatural powers, the storehouse of all the secret essentials, and all the most profound matters possessed by the Buddha as the fruit of his enlightenment, all these are proclaimed, revealed, and clearly expounded in the Lotus Sutra." End quote. Demonstrating 10 supernatural powers, the Buddha transferred the 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo to the 4 great bodhisattvas: superior practices, firmly established practices, pure practices, and boundless practices. The 4. They're on the Gohanzan. Miao Lo states that the first 5 of the 10 supernatural powers are meant for those living in Shakyamuni's lifetime, and the last 5 for the generations after his passing. But in a deeper sense, all are intended for future generations. The Buddha confirmed this later in the same chapter, quote, "Because after the Buddha has passed into extinction, there will be those who can uphold this sutra. The Buddhas are all delighted and manifest immeasurable supernatural powers." The following entrustment chapter states, quote, "At that time, Shakyamuni Buddha rose from his Dharma seat and, manifesting his great supernatural powers with his right hand, patted the heads of the immeasurable Bodhisattva Mahasattvas and spoke these words. Now I entrust..." Am I still recording? My computer's making all sorts of digestion noises. I apologize. Spoke these words. "Now I entrust it, the Lotus Sutra, to you." The Buddha first transferred the Lotus Sutra to the Bodhisattvas of the earth, and then to the Bodhisattvas taught by the Buddha in his transient status, the Bodhisattvas of the other worlds, Brahma, Shakra, the 4 heavenly kings, and others. Then Shakyamuni Buddha caused the Buddhas, who were emanations of his body, and had come from the 10 directions, to return each one to his original land, saying, quote, "The Tower of Many Treasures Buddha may also return to its former position." End quote. After the Bodhisattvas of the earth had departed from the Medicine King chapter through the Nirvana Sutra, the Buddha transferred the sutra again to the people taught by him in his transient status, and to the Bodhisattvas from other worlds. This was gleaning in order to entrust. So, I think with my throat and my computer and everything else that's going on this next question, we are going to wait for another video. It won't be long. I'll probably just continue after I take a little break and maybe have something warm to drink to fix my throat. But in the meantime, lots of ground covered in this Go Show. And I hope it's making sense to you. Comment if there's something I've said that's confused you. We'll clear it up together, okay? Appreciate all of you. If you can support, you know how. You are support by participating. So I thank you all. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. See you in the next one.